Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to the House Economic Matters Committee. Today is Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021. We have but two bills before us today. The first being House Bill 85. That will be by Delegate Bhandari. Delegate Bhandari, if you're with us, please start to unmute yourself. And our second bill will be House Bill 577 by Delegate Stewart. We have but two bills before us today. The first being House Bill 85. That will be by Delegate Bhandari. Delegate Bhandari, if you're with us, please start to unmute yourself. And our second bill will be House Bill 577 by Delegate Stewart.
That don't seem right, D.
It looked like it was repeating what I said.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it's doing. Maybe it's the delay.
Well, we're going to roll with it. We got to get with the technology. So hopefully it'll catch up. With that, is Delegate Bhandari with us?
Yes.
Would you get us started, please, sir?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Dumais, and esteemed members of Economic Matters Committee. And thank you for taking the time to consider House Bill 85, Baltimore County Worker Compensation, Permanent Partial Disability, Detention and Correctional Officer. This legislation is rather simple, but very important. If passed, it would allow Baltimore County Correctional and Detention Officer to receive the same workers' compensation benefits already available to police officers and firefighters. So far, 5 other counties have passed similar legislation in the wake of Governor Hogan signing HB 205 into law back in 2018. So this would bring Baltimore County in line with some other jurisdiction, including 2 of our neighboring in Arundel County and our county. I think that before the pandemic, this was worthwhile legislation, but that it takes on heightened importance as we continue to deal with COVID-19. Correctional and detention facilities across the county have had to deal with COVID outbreaks that correctional officer at great risk. And Maryland has not been an exception. Considering we still don't know the long-term ramification of contracting COVID, it is imperative that we make sure that any long-term health ramifications for correctional officers who have contracted the virus are somewhat mitigated by stronger worker compensation benefits. I worked closely with Chuck Conner from the Baltimore County Executive Johnny Ojeski office, as well as with Dennis Riley from the American Federation of Teachers, Maryland, John Ripley, the union president for the Baltimore County Federation of Public Employees, and our Baltimore County delegation chair. I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for their hard work on this bill and for their written and oral testimony in support of this legislation. I thank you all for your time and would request a favorable report on House Bill 85.
Are there any questions for Delegate Bhandari? Seeing none. Thank you very much. John Ripley.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I would like to thank you for taking this time to hear me regarding this bill. Thank you, Delegate Bhandari, for sponsoring this legislation. This is well-deserved and past due legislation to bring Baltimore County correctional officers equal to colleagues around them and our other public safety partners. My name is John Ripley. I'm the president of the Baltimore County Federation of Public Employees, and I'm also a correctional lieutenant with 30 years of service in Baltimore County. Again, the simplest analogy I think that I can give you is in Baltimore County, we have what's considered nationally a mega jail. We have a 15 vehicle inmate sally port. And in that sally port, we literally could have the state police in there, the county police in there, Baltimore County deputies in there, and our other colleagues, our other correctional colleagues from around the region. We could have state correctional officers in there. We could have Prince George's County correctional officers in there, Montgomery County, Howard County, Anne Arundel County, Harford County, all in this one sally port, and an incident occur, a major incident occur, and our Baltimore County correctional officers come to their assistance. And I know we're talking hypothetically here, but everyone involved received the same exact injury, and Baltimore County correctional officers would be compensated differently, would be compensated less. And that's simply not fair. This legislation brings us in line with our other public safety partners, both in corrections and public safety of police and fire. I urge your support for HB 85. This is much needed and well-deserved for our dedicated correctional officers. Let's please keep in mind that our correctional officers inside the facility are police, fire, and EMS until outside agencies arrive. Thank you very much for this consideration, and I urge your support for HB 85.
Any questions for Mr. Ripley? Delegate Impelarian and Delegate Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ripley, and thank you for your service to the county. I think one of the most important points that's never brought up, and it's not to take away from our law enforcement, that a law enforcement officer goes out every day, he risks his life. He may deal with the criminal element that day, he may not. But a correctional officer deals with a large group of criminal element every single day. There's not a day that he goes in that he thinks he's going to get a pass and not have to deal with that. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. For the correctional officers, this is an ongoing threat, that they are in an environment with people that are either up on charges or in jail or waiting to go to like Supermax. So thank you for what you do. And if it wasn't for the correctional officers and the risk that they take every single day, it wouldn't be a very nice place to be in.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for your kind words. I like to point out that in this field of public safety, really and truly, there are 4 pillars to that public safety. We can have the best police and fire departments there are in the state, region, or even in the country, but without the other pillars of corrections and 911, your public safety systems will not be successful. So thank you for recognizing that.
Thank you.
Delegate Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess this bill will go for the sponsor, Delegate Bhandari. You might have said in your testimony, has Baltimore County taken a position on this, the county delegation?
Yes, they are supporting this bill. Oh,
All right.
county, not the delegation. We did not have a meeting, but I had a meeting with the chair, and pretty much he likes the bill. And the county executive is supporting the bill. I think you have a written testimony from county, Baltimore County.
Is this the first year you all have brought this bill to Annapolis, or have you had it previous years?
Like last year, Baltimore County was included, but it was carved out. Baltimore County did not have enough time to look at it. So this year I work over the interim as I mentioned the testimony, and they're good.
So the county exec, county council, and delegation are all good. Even though up here we really just care about delegation, but everybody seems to be good.
So far, I believe, but I need to testify with our county delegation separately as well. And I do strongly believe that they will be good too.
Okay.
Delegate Bhandari, just to follow up on Delegate Walker's question, we would need a letter from the Baltimore County delegation saying that they're supportive of it, as it is a local bill, before we can vote to move forward. So that's sort of the next step in the process. We'll be waiting get a letter from the delegation saying that they support it, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be meeting on Friday as soon as the bill will be heard, and I will be sending a letter of support.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Delegate Bhandari? Seeing none, thank you very much. That
I think
concludes
Delegate Brooks has a question, Chair.
Delegate
Yeah,
Brooks.
no, just a comment. That it was introduced last year as HB 685. That's to Delegate Walker's question. Thanks.
Alrighty. Anyone else? If not, that concludes the witness list for those who have signed up for oral testimony for House Bill 85. So we will declare that hearing as being held. We will now switch over to House Bill 577 and Delegate Stewart, if he is with us.
I am, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. For the record, I'm Delegate Vaughn Stewart, and this is HB 577. So last spring, as I'm sure many of y'all are aware, poultry processing plants on the Eastern Shore played host to some of the largest COVID-19 outbreaks in the country. One report estimated that more than 2,000 Maryland farm workers died from COVID, with nearly 250,000 confirmed cases. And that doesn't even count the families of farm workers or the thousands of other Marylanders who may have contracted COVID due to their contact with a farm worker. And out of 2,200 farm worker deaths, nearly 1,900 of them were workers in the poultry industry. Since then, the industry has taken some steps, to their credit, to make the workplace safer for farm workers. And across the country, many states have stepped in to require safer workplaces for farm workers. However, employers have taken far fewer actions to ensure farm worker safety in the realms of housing and transportation. Farm workers often live in cramped employer-provided housing and take crowded employer-provided buses to and from the work site. And so we simply can't curb the risk of COVID transmission among farm workers without addressing housing and transportation. HB 577 would require the Department of Labor to promulgate common sense regulations to improve housing conditions and also reduce the risk of COVID transmission. So for example, these regulations would require employers to isolate workers if they test positive for COVID. And if that's not possible, the bill would at least require employers to contact their local health departments to arrange an isolated housing arrangement. The regulations would also include regular universal housing inspections, whistleblower protections, and the posting of notices regarding health protocols. The bill would essentially turn the Maryland Department of Agriculture's guidance from a recommendation into a requirement. I've already spoken with a few farmers in my home county of Montgomery who have minor objections here and there to the bill. And so I'll tell y'all what I told them, which is that I'm happy to submit a few sponsor amendments after the hearing to mitigate any undue hardship that would be felt by family farmers. I think that there's a way that we can work this out to make sure that family farmers aren't, unjustly hurt by the bill while still making sure that their workers are safe during this deadly pandemic. At the end of the day, Maryland's farm workers are working tirelessly every day and have done so, during this pandemic so that we can eat, so that we have food on the table. I think that every single worker in the state deserves a safe, healthy, sanitary living conditions, regardless of who their employer is and regardless of their immigration status. Passing this bill would set up some common sense rules to improve housing conditions and to prevent the spread of COVID-19. I urge a favorable report.
Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to have a couple brief technical questions for the sponsor. First off, I noticed that the bill is asking the Department of Labor to get involved in housing conversations, and historically seen as the Department of Housing and Community Development
85 and
that deals with housing.
Hold on,
Also,
Delegate Turner, can you mute yourself? Thank you. Go on, Delegate Adams.
So I was asking the Department of Labor, you chose to use as the entity to do the housing and the inspections, the enforcement. And what I'm used to seeing in the state of Maryland is we use the Department of Housing and Community Development and then local authority, municipalities, counties to normally do housing inspections. I'm just curious why the Department of Labor.
Yeah, great question. You're absolutely right that that's normally the way this goes. But currently, so there, you're basically talking about two different types of visa statuses. You're talking about H2A workers and H2B workers. Currently in the state of Maryland, the Department of Labor is responsible for the inspection regime for H2A workers. And this bill would basically make that a universal inspection regime. And that's why DLS, and that's why we sort of collectively decided to use Department of Labor. Basically, they're already doing this.
So the CDC already has guidance, and the U.S. Department of Labor obviously regulates these visa programs. And I'm under the impression that there are already inspections. Why do you see these inspections as not being par with what we need in Maryland?
So CDC has issued some guidance, and Department of Labor has issued some guidance, and Maryland Department of Agriculture has issued some guidance. Some of that is requirements, some of that is not requirements. What you're referring to, I believe, is that there is an inspection regime already required for H2A visa holders, but there are actually no inspections currently required on any level of government for H2B workers. So the provisions in the bill would not be duplicative of federal law or anything else, but they would in some instances make mandatory what has currently been recommended by, for example, the CDC.
Last and brief question. Your bill through the H2B program seeks to go way beyond poultry. You seem to be interested in poultry, but you're going to, in this bill, grasp broad statewide industries that are using H2Bs. Is that your intention?
It's certainly the case, and this is a great question, Delegate Adams. It's certainly the case that when you look at where the problem has been in terms of COVID transmission and COVID deaths, that has mostly been concentrated in the poultry industry, just because there are way more employees there who live in employer housing that are in cramped conditions. But it is a statewide bill because I do think that it applies statewide. I mean, I'm
saying, no, I'm sorry. What I'm saying is that the bill, the way you've drafted it, brings industries that you could theoretically knock right out of business because of their use of H2Bs, but they're not poultry. That's
right.
I'm trying to, yeah. You actually use farm worker in your bill title, and I'm going to leave it there. I think you've answered the question. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Delegate Branch.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Stewart, have you spoken with any of the other members in the areas that actually have these poultry in the poultry industry? Have you spoken to any of them at all?
You mean my colleagues who serve in the General Assembly?
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely. Being on ENT, we deal with these agricultural issues all the time, and so
what have their response been? I mean, I'm wondering what they're saying because you know, I know you're in Montgomery County, and I don't know that you would have many chicken farms or what have you there. So I'm just wondering, because I would be concerned if someone was putting in a bill that impacted Baltimore and hadn't spoken to me or talked to me about it. So I'm just trying to get from you what some of them are feeling as a result of you putting in a bill about chicken farmers and employees and having to say that COVID has run rampant there, which probably has, I don't know. But I'm just trying to get an idea from you what kind of response you're getting from the members that have that in their jurisdiction.
Yeah, great question, Delegate Branch. And this sort of speaks to Delegate Adams' point as well, which is that this is a statewide bill. I mean, that is my intent. While I think the worst abuses and the worst transmission has been in the poultry facilities, mostly in the lower shore, this is an issue of statewide concern. So I actually do have a fair number of farms in my district. I have a more rural part of Montgomery County. And in fact, the agricultural services by the county are actually headquartered about 2 miles away from my house within my district. So I've spoken with Montgomery County farmers about this, and I have spoken with a number of my colleagues, both this session and across numerous sessions, because I've put in agricultural legislation before. And so to answer your question, number one, I don't think this is comparable to something that would only affect, for example, Baltimore City. That said, I can certainly report that my colleagues—
No, I don't have a chicken farm. I don't have any of that in Baltimore.
No, I know. What I'm saying,
and if it's a statewide bill, fine. I've been around just like the chairman, Delegate Davis, for more than 27 years. We've seen
Oh, Lord.
backwards and forwards. So we understand, what you've put in. I'm just trying to figure out, will we, be hearing from other members from other jurisdictions that actually have those type of farms? Because you specifically mentioned them, and I'm sure the bill is centered around making sure that that the impact isn't there any further, and that's fine. But I was just wondering how they was feeling. That's all.
Yeah, you might hear from them, Delegate Brandt, for sure. I mean, I would say in general that a lot of our colleagues who do represent some of the lower shore counties tend to be a little bit more sympathetic to the poultry industry than I am. So I would say, I think it's fair to say that at least a few of them would strongly oppose this bill.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't mean to out you out in the time you've been here in the legislature.
They can all Google. It ain't much of a secret. Delegate Walker, then Delegate Aarons, then Delegate Wilson, then Delegate Mouse. I'm just going across on the screen. That's now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, old school. But my question is for Delegate Stewart. Are there any other occupations in which we single out and have them go through special precautions like this?
Not in the arena of housing, because this occupation is really unique. Most employers do not provide housing for their employees. So I'm personally not aware of any bills introduced this session or any other state.
Let's suppose somebody doesn't even offer housing. Take the housing component kind of out of it. I'm trying to think, is there any profession in which this would be applicable to? Do we do this to anybody in the state right now?
Well, we can't take housing out of it because this is a housing bill.
I know, but I'm just saying in terms of these people or the folks you're talking about, I'm just going through the bill again. They're here on the workforce visa. With their workforce visa, like I have a number of, there's a huge landscaping company in my district, and they do the housing type too, but we don't put these type of requirements on you could have an au pair. An au pair may have housing that comes with it. So I'm asking, is there any other occupation or line of duty in the state of Maryland at all that we put any of these requirements on?
I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any, the Department of Labor, for example, already obviously inspects farm worker housing. I'm not aware of any other instance where the Department of Labor goes out and inspects employer provided housing, but I'm also just not aware of any other industry that provides employer provided housing in this way.
Yeah, I know, but I'm thinking about even for, and I'm gonna cut it off here, Mr. Chair, but I'm thinking even for like a doctor, I've got a doctor in my family, whatever, the stuff they do, they're supposed to follow state law, but there aren't any of these mandates that go along with the state law that say, somebody's gonna check on you to tell you you've got this temperature, you've tested for this and that. It's kind of, we're all going for the greater good in this situation here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are probably, specific laws. I'm not on H2o, but I know that there are, myriad laws that sort of single out doctors. There are others that single out dentists. There are some that single out barbers in terms of health and safety regulations. We already have a ton of regulations on the books that single out, the agricultural industry in particular, or that exempt, farm workers from laws, for example.
But I think I'm looking at COVID in your bill and COVID. I mean, for me, I think in Prince George County, our biggest thing was grocery store workers, or the grocery store. That was essential. Couldn't say, oh, you have to do this, you have to do this, where it seems like you're telling this particular occupation group over there, mostly on the shore, you have to do this, you have to do this, and these steps have to be taken, which it seems like you're singling out certain.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm definitely singling them out. And the reason that we're singling out this one particular area, and this is not a broader applicable bill saying, all employer housing, is just the agricultural industry is extremely unique. Giant and Safeway don't provide employer housing. And so when you talk about trying to keep workers safe in their housing that's provided by their employer, there's really only one industry that you're talking about. And that's why we have to single them out.
No, I mean, we got, I'm coming from Ways and Means. We got jockeys that are provided housing at all of our racetracks in the state of Maryland. So there are other instances there. And in that case being said, I'm gonna kind of follow up with a colleague, Delegate Branch there. Like, hey, if this were something that were, specific to my district and you hadn't really talked to me and other delegates about, I don't know. It seems like this is clearly a sure type of deal there. And I think you owe them the courtesy of, I'm curious to hear what some of my colleagues will say. Thank you, and War Eagle.
Roll Tide to you as well, Delegate Walker.
That went over my head, so we'll let that be. Who's next? Was it you, Delegate Arentz?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Delegate, thank you for presenting the bill. Farming is a big thing in my district, in my area, and I can assure you this bill has met with a lot of resistance over there. I'm curious as to the number of deaths you mentioned in the farm industry. Where did you get that statistic, first of all?
Purdue University put out a study, and I'm happy to send it to the committee afterwards, but Purdue University put out a study estimating the number of farm worker deaths in various parts.
All right, do you have any idea how that's performed? Since I know there was an initial hit when COVID first came in. Can you estimate how that's fared the last, say, 5 months, 4 months? Do you know what that rate, how well we appeared to be there?
You know, I don't know offhand. I don't want to speculate on their methodology, but I do know that the spike in COVID deaths and transmission was worse in the spring, and something like April or June was the height of it, and that it has declined since then because of the workplace safety precautions the industries.
And that's where I think that's where I'm trying to come with the bill. I appreciate the fact that you want to keep them safe, and we all do. And I think that the farming community in particular has stepped up far above and beyond to make sure these workers are protected. I deal with a lot of canneries and stuff, and I think that the expectations of something like this are a little bit further. And the other question I had for you is this a sunset bill? When do you feel, when COVID becomes under control, does this bill go away?
Yeah, this is a pandemic related bill. It just, and if you look at the fiscal note, the fiscal office is estimating it's basically a pandemic related bill.
Okay. So, but it doesn't define when it shuts off and what the criteria is for shutting it off.
You know, I would have to look at the text whether or not it's tied to the state of emergency, but it's certainly my intent that it's tied to the state of emergency. You know, we're not going to require, you know, COVID related isolation, you know, into the 2030s.
Okay, that's all for now, but thank you. It's just I'm getting a lot of play off of this bill, meaning that there's a lot of people upset about it because we as farmers, we're a pretty close-knit community over here, and these people care about the workers. That's what gets the food on your table and my table, and I don't think there's very few people out there deliberately harming people, and I think we're doing all we can, at least from my side. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Delegate Mounts.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Hey, Delegate Stewart, thank you for being here to testify and bringing the bill, or thank you for being here to testify. I wouldn't say thank you for bringing the bill. I was trying to understand it a little bit, and I was listening to your testimony, and because it's a bill for H2A and H2B, and in this testimony, you said that the bill is designed for the poultry industry, or well, what is your intent behind the bill?
No, I didn't say it was designed for the poultry industry. I just mentioned that when you look at the reported cases and the reported deaths of COVID, it's mostly geared toward the poultry industry, but the bill is statewide. I mean, anytime I think that you have farm workers living in close quarters where they could easily spread COVID among the workforce, I think that that's of state of our concern as policymakers. But it just so happens to be that's more common in the poultry industry.
Okay, so maybe I was confused a little bit when you were discussing that, and I think you were referencing maybe that I think your statement was that only the farm workers provide housing for their employees. Was that what you said, or did I hear that wrong?
In my response to Delegate Walker, I was saying that this is a unique occupation and that the employer is providing housing for the employee, and that there are not many cases. He brought a good one. I've clearly never been on Ways and Means. I didn't even think of jockeys, which is a great point, but I'm not aware of many occupations these days where the employer would provide housing for the employee. And I think the poultry industry sort of goes above and beyond that, where you can occasionally have 10 people, for example, living in a 1-bedroom apartment. Jockeys, I've seen their quarters, at least photos of them. They're small, but there are not 20 of them living in one of their little houses.
Yeah, and so before this hearing, before this hearing began, what was your impression of industries that provide housing? Who were you thinking of?
Could you explain what you mean?
Well, you put this bill in, you put this bill in to regulate employment linked to these two visas where housing is provided. And so my question to you is what are those industries?
Other industries besides agriculture, you mean?
Who are you regulating? Yeah.
This bill only relates to agricultural employees.
Yeah, but who are the industries? Or do you know who you're regulating with this bill?
I'm not sure I'm following.
Do you know who would be covered by this bill? Do you know the different industries? I mean, is it the horse racing industry? Is it poultry? I don't think that was your presumption.
The horse racing industry would certainly not be covered by the bill. No, we're talking about farm workers. We're talking about H2a farm workers, migrant farm workers in the bill. That's clearly stated. We're not talking about jockeys. We're not talking about giant employees. I was just engaging in those hypotheticals, but we're only talking about the agricultural industry.
Well, my point to you in my line of questioning is if you're going to put this bill in to create these regulations, I would think that you would know who you're going to regulate. And I don't think that you really understand, or I don't think it's understood in this testimony who all would be covered by the bill. But that aside, with regard to the regulations proposed, the regulatory structure proposed in the bill, why would you have the Department of Labor implement the housing regulations with COVID when we've used our health departments and local entities to provide regulation for different types of COVID protection and that sort of thing?
Delegate Adams covered this earlier. Basically, the answer is that the Department of Labor already does this. They already do inspections in farm worker housing. And so that's why we chose them to that agency to continue doing this. However, if it's the committee's will to house it in a different agency, I'm agnostic on that point.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Delegate Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Vaughn, in reading your bill, some of the things that struck me, to my understanding and reading, although you call it the Healthy Farm Workers Act, it pretty much deals with individuals who have an H2A and H2B visa. You're saying that can't apply to anyone but farm workers under those two visas?
The intent of the bill is to refer to farm workers in the agricultural sector.
Well, I got that by the name. I was just wondering if are you holding today that the the H2A and H2 visas, H2A and H2B visas only apply, the only people that get those are farm workers. Is that what your understanding is?
Okay, no, that's not what my understanding is. I know that folks, for example, in the landscaping industry and whatnot, also hire folks under particularly H2A or H2B visas.
That's correct.
No, I get that.
And I don't see anything specific to it being farm workers. Again, this is a cursory review. I just see it workers, H2A and H2B, which would include much more than just your farm workers. Again, that's my understanding. It's not limited to farm workers. And also, so clearly we're not talking about you in your statement, your opening statement, you basically discussed about farm workers or workers, but these are not undocumented. That's incorrect. These are migrant workers, correct? All these individuals we're discussing.
Correct.
Okay, and so we're talking about, so anything from restaurants, au pairs, jockeys, canneries, anybody with the H2A or H2B visa, if they provide any kind of housing, that's what this would require. This would require those inspections, correct?
That is not my intent. If it's broader than that in the text of the bill, I would refer the question to my panelists who can go into more detail about the legislative drafting.
Okay,
but,
and last,
no, I don't want it to apply to canneries and jockeys. No.
And this your intent is obviously for the COVID-19. So I don't see anywhere in the bill where it terminates, and maybe it connects to another bill, which I don't see. Just talks about when they're required to start by October of 2021. Doesn't have an end date, a sunset, or anything like that. And beyond supposition, it doesn't seem that it actually has a sunset, i.e. once we're done with this emergency. So I would suggest that's something that we deal with. But lastly, what's the enforcement mechanism?
I believe currently the enforcement mechanism is that the Department of Labor is empowered to fine farmers or businesses that aren't in compliance, for example, with the existing inspection regime.
And so that's where I want to go with this is, and do you understand what those fines are? The civil fines, are there any criminal penalties? Basically, what would these farmers face if they don't follow along with these guidelines and fail an inspection?
I believe there may be a provision in the bill that actually empowers the Department of Labor to issue the enforcement mechanisms. Under current law, I believe there are civil penalties. They're not very large, though. I don't know the numbers offhand that farmers are liable if businesses are liable for if they don't comply with existing inspection regimes. Because I mean, like I said earlier, H2a housing is already required to be inspected, for example. This bill just extends it to H2b. So there's already an entire inspection regime, dozens of employees in the Department of Labor who do this work. I'm not aware of any criminal penalties. I think these are basically civil fines that assessed by the Department of Labor.
Okay, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Impelarian and Delegate DeMay. Delegate Impelari, you're
I got it. Delegate Stewart, there were some questions about how this affected your county. And I was down in your county and I discovered that the largest turkey producer comes from Montgomery County. And have you sat down and talked with them? Because apparently a lot of turkeys come out of Montgomery County.
I'm not sure whether this question is in jest or not, based on the laugh. But there are a number of farmers of all different types in Montgomery County. I have not sat down with them, obviously, given social distancing guidelines, but I did have the opportunity to speak with 2 farmers in Montgomery County last week via Zoom and talk through their concerns. And like I said in my initial testimony, I told them that I was open to amendments to make sure that any concerns are addressed, including, for example, what Delegate Wilson mentioned regarding the sunset. I mean, clearly, like I mentioned earlier, I don't want these pandemic-related guidelines to be in effect forever. But I told that we do have a fair number of Montgomery County farmers, and I spoke with 2 of them, and I told them I'm open to amendments. I don't want to put them out of business. I'm a believer in family farms. While I'm sure there are a number of turkeys, both actual turkeys and turkey people that come out of Montgomery County, I'm proud to say, as Delegate Walker mentioned, that I came out of Alabama, where we have a thriving agricultural industry.
Well, and just to follow up, that when I visited that farm, there were some migrants on the farm, but they were a single family living in a single house. And I think what you would find that most poultry operations, as far as farming, most poultry operations, as far as, raising different types of animals, they only have a few people working there. Now, what you may be thinking of is the poultry industry where they do the processing. Yes, they have a large amount of people who work in close contact with each other, but the poultry industry, as far as processing, they don't have them living on facilities. They're regular employees. They might be on these visas, but they go home every night to their own places. So the farms that you seem to be targeting are not the problem. They have a very small number of people. I mean, farmers are there to make money. They're not there to house, 100 people to raise a couple coops of chickens. And, unfortunately, that is actually the way the system works. So your bill seems like you would be targeting a ton of small businesses that may be housing 1 or 2 families, which, whether they were on the farm or off the farm, they would be in close proximity. And when you're talking a family of 10, that might be 2 brothers, their wives, and their children working on that farm. So whether they were here or somewhere else, those families would still be together. So I don't see how this bill gets to what you're after. And if you're thinking of the poultry industry, yeah, Tyson, they have hundreds of people working in close proximity. Those people are not sleeping and living in close proximity. They go home every night. And that's my main issue with the bill.
I appreciate that, Delegate Impalaria. I would just note in response that one of the small farms that I'm talking about, Montgomery County, they walked me through how they did have 1, 2, or 3 H2a workers come, every season to help them out, and that the housing, for example, isolating one of them, within a separate facility, for example, from another, if they contracted COVID, would not be difficult for them because they were living separately. So that part of the bill they were not as concerned about. But they were, however, concerned with the transportation part of the bill that requires distance transportation options. And they told me, well, hey, that's not practicable for us because I have one sedan. I let all 2 or 3 of my employees ride in the same sedan. Your bill would require me to get 3 different sedans. And I said, well, if that's true, happy to get a sponsor amendment drafted to, make the transportation requirement practicable. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's not the goal of the legislation to put a bunch of small family farms out of business or to make this onerous on them. I think we can balance small farms, keeping doing what they do best, which is put food on the table for families across the state, while at the same time making sure we don't have any farm workers either living in unsafe housing as it relates to COVID or uninhabitable housing in terms of just shoddy conditions.
Well, and that really has nothing to do with the COVID. That would be a general statement that we don't want anybody like that. I have a friend and she worked in the nursing home industry. She got COVID. She stayed home with her 2 daughters. They isolated in the same house. The 2 daughters never came down with COVID. And, she didn't go to work. So common sense would say, you're sick, you don't go to work. We have bills like that all the time. Nobody's telling anybody with COVID or forcing someone to go to work. So to say they'd have to be transported in different vehicles, why would someone who is feeling sick from COVID have to be transported in a different vehicle? I guess with that same philosophy, maybe we shouldn't have school buses and send school kids to school on buses anymore, because one kid might have COVID. They should all go in separate vehicles provided by the state. And it just seems that the bill is overreaching and overburdensome, and the juice isn't worth the squeeze for the amount of people that you might be able to help if there's a problem.
Delegate Blair, if I could just clarify just briefly to that, point well taken overall, but I just want to clarify a little bit what I was saying. If someone is sick, has a positive COVID test, or is suspected to have COVID, they would be required to isolate in their housing from other people that they're living in close proximity with who are also employees if there's a positive test. However, certainly we don't want people getting on the employer provided bus to go to work if they have any symptoms or if they're positive. Certainly, the bill separately says that there should be distancing, if possible, on employer provided transportation. That's among people who we assume to be healthy.
It seems like a lot, but thank you very much.
Delegate Dume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Bond, did you say that that there are regulations in place for all of the provisions in your bill already?
No. So the bill would require the Department of Labor to promulgate new regulations that are COVID specific. We don't have any COVID specific regulations regarding to housing or transportation because COVID didn't exist. However, there is an inspection regime already from the Department of Labor where they effectuate federal guidelines regarding H2a workers.
Okay, and then I wanted to just go to the fiscal note. Obviously, it's high. It's $762,000. It indicates that $557,000 and some change would be for salaries and fringe benefits. Have you had any discussions with leadership about this bill as far as whether or not we could pass something with that type of a fiscal note?
Well, not yet. I know that obviously there's sort of like a cap of around $100,000 per year before you need to go to leadership to get approval on a fiscal note. But I would say 2 things. One, I'd rather work with the department first to see if we can get that down by either limiting the inspection regime somewhat to try to, because it's just personnel costs that they're talking about. So I'd rather talk to them first to see how far we can get it down. But I would also just note that that cost is really only for 1 year or however long the pandemic is going to continue. So this is not what we normally see in a fiscal note of say $150,000 per year for years and years and years. This would be a one-time cost to make sure that farm workers are safe during a pandemic. And there are a lot of other costs associated with that. If the food supply chain breaks down, that's going to cost Maryland a lot more money than paying, a few $100,000 to make sure that the Department of Labor is fully staffed to have, effectuate the enforcement regime.
And I have to admit, this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but just looking at the fiscal note, it also appears that there may well be federal regulations that are already in place and that we are sort of following. And it indicates that our Department of Labor's Division of Workforce Development and Audit Adult Learning already inspects housing for the H2a workers once per year. Does not inspect housing for H2b workers, but although the chat room is technically for members of the committee, someone who will testify later indicates that H2b does not require that housing be provided. So I am a little concerned that we, make sure that whatever we're asking the Department of Labor to do, that it's in line with what is required under the federal guidelines. And in fact, it's federal funds that currently fund the inspections, at least according to the fiscal note, whatever. So perhaps it's we need more funding from the federal government, and that's the direction that we ought to be looking.
I will certainly defer to the panelists who know far more about the topic in terms of the intricacies about federal law, but I will just say that yes, the Department of Labor carries out federal regulations now in terms of H2a housing. H2a employees are required to be provided housing from their employers. There are no inspections in place or federal guidelines for H2b workers. That would be put in place by the bill, and that's what's so expensive, hiring additional Department of Labor employees to carry out the H2b inspections that are not required by the federal government.
And that's because the inspectors can't do something that is not required under the federal law. So then the state has to pay for that.
Yeah, exactly. The ones that are currently employed. So we would need new employees, at least on a short-term basis, to make sure that everyone's in compliance with the bill. But like I said, I'm sure that I'm not nowhere near the expert as the panelists that are going to be talking. So I'm sure I've flubbed any number of things.
Okay.
Help for me.
All right. I'll wait for the panelists. Thank you.
All right. That appears to be all the names that I saw signed up, or all the names for the sponsor, all the requests to speak to the sponsor. So now I'd like to go with some of the others who have signed up. Maryland Legal Aid. I don't have a specific name, but they're signed up as Maryland Legal Aid. Anyone?
Yes, that's me, Scott Black from Maryland Legal Aid. Thank you, Chairman Davis, Delegate Stewart, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 577. This bill will protect Maryland's migrant and temporary agricultural workers and all Marylanders by requiring employers to adopt safety and prevention guidelines against the transmission of COVID-19. Maryland Legal Aid supports House Bill 577 and asks that this committee give it a favorable report. We at Legal Aid have been providing civil legal service to Maryland's migrant temporary agricultural workers for many decades now. These individuals are essential workers. They plant, cultivate, and harvest crops grown here in Maryland, which are sold in Maryland grocery stores and ultimately end up on Marylanders' plates. And those industries are crops and orchards and many of the other ones that we've talked about here today. The Department of Homeland Security has identified agricultural labor as a critical component in the food supply and recognizes that the essential role these workers play in the food supply chain. These essential and temporary farm workers are undoubtedly susceptible to COVID-19 and can become vectors of transmissible diseases if we don't take necessary and common sense precautions. It is now widely accepted that social distancing and PPE are effective and vital in reducing the infection rate of COVID-19. House Bill 577 recognizes and establishes universally acknowledged and common sense measures. It requires that the employers of these agricultural workers, these employers of these non-immigrant visa holders who have been tested positive or exposed to or experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 provide an isolated living space, and that includes sanitary, sleeping, and kitchen facilities. It also requires developing a regular cleaning and disinfecting schedule for the housing and the vehicles. Currently, employers of migrant and temporary workers have been given a lot of discretion in how they treat the pandemic. This discretionary approach has not proven effective. Recently, a worker came to legal aid's attention. He was working at a Maryland food processing plant. He complained of being forced to work close to other workers that were exhibiting signs of COVID-19. These employees were left to their own devices. They were improvising PPE or sharing PPE. They also wanted to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation or for if they came up and they reported some kind of incident. House Bill 577 establishes reasonable standards that prevent the spread of COVID-19 during this pandemic. And it's a timely and necessary step. And legal aid supports 577 without amendments and asks that this committee give it a favorable report. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Delegate Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Black, you're an attorney as well?
Yes, sir.
Outstanding. Okay, so as you read the bill, what enforcement mechanisms do you see in the bill?
Well, as Delegate Stewart says, if you're going towards the Department of Labor, what they're required to do for H2a holder, upon a violation, that grower or employer might lose access to these essential workers. They might be not allowed to take advantage of the H2a program, and they might be short than labor subsequent years of their production.
So I believe that's the intention, but I did not find that in the bill. Those were my concerns. And the last question I want to ask you is, I do get the intent and I understand the issues that we're trying to face. Is this like a day late and a dollar short though, as far as, where we are in the pandemic by the emergency passage of this legislation? A lot of these things are required for any business as far as social distancing, things of that nature. So the only thing we really are dealing with now is the housing.
I think I understand what you're saying, and I think that better late than never is the approach to take. And I think that uniformity of approach to mitigating the effects of the pandemic and increasing the prevention of its spread is what's important.
And for the people you represent, for their benefit, when would you see this bill ending as far as the mechanisms put in place? When would they no longer be enforced?
Well, I guess when there was an overall understanding that the COVID-19 or the spinoff of COVID-19 has been dealt with and is no longer in danger of shutting down our economy or spreading to other citizens.
So possibly past the state of emergency, correct?
I think this bill goes hand in hand with the state of emergency.
So you don't mind it expiring once the state of emergency is over? And I'm not, these aren't gotcha questions. I'm trying to solve a problem.
No, and I haven't given a lot of thought to the termination of this bill, although the heavy use of language of COVID-19 would make me comfortable in saying that I think that the provisions in this bill would naturally end when the emergency of COVID-19 ends.
Okay, thank you, sir.
You're welcome, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say one sentence in response to what the first part Delegate Wilson said, I found the relevant portion of the bill that he was asking about earlier.
Sure.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry to go out of turn, Delegate Wilson, but if you look at section 12 of the bill, it basically asks the Department of Labor, requires the Department of Labor to promulgate enforcement regulations. So the enforcement regime for the bill would be promulgated by the Department of Labor hand in hand with the regulations themselves.
Right. Your bill itself doesn't suggest any enforcement. It would be something the Department of Labor would do in itself, correct?
Correct. No specific enforcement regime is specified by the bill.
And no specific termination.
Correct. Though, you know, if you look at some of the provisions, obviously, if people are no longer testing positive for COVID, right, then the provisions wouldn't apply anymore. So
I know. We're lawmakers. I'm just trying. I really want to just be specific as I can so people don't get caught in a catch-22.
No, I totally get that. And if it was the committee's will to put a more specific sunset in the bill or say a certain time after the state of emergency or whatever, that is certainly fine with the sponsor. And I appreciate the line of questioning.
Delegate Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Black, what's the name of the organization that you represent again?
Maryland Legal Aid.
Maryland Legal Aid. And what's on the basis, you represent a number of immigrant workers, I'm assuming, correct? Is that why you all are taking a position on this? Or,
Yes.
So
Specifically H2a visa holders, yes.
specifically those type of, okay. Because the more I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I'm just, and Mr. Black, you can chime in, so can you, Delegate Stewart, as well. Like, I'm thinking, are those people that come on the visas are here to work and occupy and do a job. But what about, you know, if you've got I'm not going to go into it. All righty. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good question, Jay.
Well, actually, because I'm being urged on by CT now, I'm going to bring up my question.
All right.
Sure, I don't have a number of these visa workers here. However, I have a number of women or single family homes where you've got 6, 7 people living in an apartment and one person tests positive. They don't have the opportunity to just say, oh, we need somebody to come, give us separate housing, give us a new mode of transportation, take care of this and that. So I'm just kind of wondering, when you say you represent legal aid, it's like, I understand it's one specific group of people, but however, Delegate Stewart, going to you, like, you know, the problems are in my community. I mean, you know, we're trying to come up with solutions. Myself, Delegate Balderrama, Delegate Turner, in which we've got these real life problems, and we're not given an extra benefit. We wish we could find extra benefits to give these people with real life situations, put in tough situations. So why do we single out? And I asked you this earlier. You're singling out one occupation, and one, you're regulating the employers, and two, they're getting a special benefit that I know people in my district would love to have.
Well, absolutely. And I wish that a lot of the folks in your district and everybody's district could have that benefit as well. I mean, I think we should be trying to help as many of our constituents as we possibly can. The reason that we're singling out this specific case is because the employer in a lot of these cases is providing the housing, or they're referring the employee to specific housing that's used by their coworkers. And that's just a unique situation. I can't imagine very many folks in your district. Yeah, they could be living in crowded conditions, but those are conditions that they've gotten, you know, in their.
Absolutely. The largest landscaping company in the Mid-Atlantic area is headquartered in my district, and they get a number of these seasonal workers that come out as essentials. So, and they stay in houses, and they do stay, they're in there. So we're all trying to find a solution. I just don't see where this one's coming for, but if we can expand it possibly, I don't know, but right now.
And I want to agree with that. Everyone deserves adequate housing, and legal aid, that is a large emphasis of our mission, is to provide that and to protect that, ensure that. These particular workers are coming in without, they're a very vulnerable population, because they come into the US to do work, but they are not on any kind of immigration status other than their work visa. They don't have, and their housing and employment are tied to that specific contract. So they don't have many options other than what was provided to them by that grower. So that's why they're particularly vulnerable.
The housing is optional. It's not required. They can live.
It's required.
It's required that they live within the certain, within the housing provided by the employer.
It's required. If they cannot reasonably return to their home, their resident, then the employer is required to provide them housing. And in fact, if they, if the grower does provide them housing, because they're required to, and they employ a U.S. worker, and that U.S. worker cannot reasonably get back to his house at the end of a work shift, then that U.S. worker is also given the opportunity to be provided.
Okay, at the end of the work shift, I got you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? If not, let me go on to
Chair, sorry, Mr. Chair, sorry, I had a question, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Charcutia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a question. I'm intrigued by Delegate Walker's question, and I guess the question for Delegate Stewart is how you'd feel about an amendment that maybe expands if there are other workers on a similar visa where housing's provided. In this case, it sounds like in Delegate Walker's district, which I'd be interested in learning more about, Delegate Walker. It might be landscaping. How would you feel about an amendment that expands to protect folks on a similar visa? I'm not as familiar with who all would be on this visa, but on a similar visa with housing, but maybe not in agriculture.
I'd be very much open to that amendment.
Okay, thanks.
I'd be very open to talking to my large employers about it to get their take on
it. Layla Kraus.
Hi, thank you for listening to me. And I'm Layla Borrero Kraus. I work with CATA, Farm Workers Support Committee. I'm based in Salisbury, Maryland. I conduct outreach to many of the immigrants that come to live in these farms throughout the states, but mainly in the Eastern Shore. We really need to, really need this bill to pass for workers who live in poor living conditions. So many as 30 workers with beds so close to each other, sharing a kitchen, bathroom, travel in vans with no social distance or PPE for safety. Most of them are here from April for planting, and they go through November for the pumpkins. Many travel from Mexico, others from Texas and Florida. And we have a large migrant camp here that houses about 800 people. It used to be a POW camp in Somerset County. And the conditions are horrendous there as well, even though they have improved throughout the years. But there's still close quarters for them, sharing bathrooms and kitchens. Many of them that when I work with them, they don't complain because they want to continue having employment year after year. But when I go through the sites, I don't see drinking water, sanitary facilities, or washing hands in some of the fields that they work. They don't wear them, they don't have masks, and we have a lot of watermelon workers in this area. And as you can imagine, watermelon is a fruit of this country that many people enjoy. I cannot understand how, they pass inspection, some of this housing, because most of them are in rural areas, and they turn, into migrant housing for the workers that come across state lines or even, country borders. Because they want to return, especially the H2As. H2As especially for agricultural workers. And we have a house here in Dorchester County that houses over 30 workers. We have the H2B, which are workers for the crab picking. And there are many of them, more than 30 as well. They want to return every season. In-house, need to be inspected regularly. And when they arrive, they get inspected, but throughout the season, they do not. And they don't have the extra protection to separate the workers when somebody comes out with positive COVID. They don't have the extra rooms because they're counted by the spaces for the workers who arrive. Thank you. And CATA is a Farm Workers Support Committee who support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy Liebman.
Hi, my name is Amy Liebman. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify. I'm speaking to you from Salisbury, where I work for Migrant Clinicians Network, and I serve as their Director of Environmental and Occupational Health, and I'm testifying in support of House Bill 577. Food and farm workers, as we've heard a lot today, are the backbone of our food system, yet they and their families face entrenched poverty, an unjust immigration system, and dangerous working and living conditions. And many of these workers have been intentionally excluded from some of our basic labor laws, such as our right to organize, minimum wage, and paid sick leave. And they're also excluded from important health and safety regulations that are afforded to other workers. COVID-19 has turned what already is a labor crisis into a mega crisis. And in my line of work, I see firsthand the negative impacts of poor housing conditions provided by employers to H2 and migrant workers. Many of these workers are provided housing, as Layla described, where they don't have a lot of choice about where they sleep, and they're sleeping in crowded bunks and barracks. And in some cases, potable water and adequate bathing facilities are limited. And we know that housing is an important social determinant of health. Poor quality and inadequate housing are associated with a wide range of health conditions, including respiratory infections, in addition to COVID-19, asthma, lead poisoning, injuries, and poor mental health. Substandard housing can include situations where there's leaky water, poor ventilation, dirty carpets, and pest infestation, and that can lead to an increase in mold and mites and other allergens associated with poor health. Residential crowding is also linked to illnesses such as tuberculosis and to psychological distress. While these living conditions can be unsafe and inhumane to begin with, we throw in a disease like COVID-19 that's an aerosol transmissible disease, and we have a recipe to spread this deadly sickness like rapid fire among workers. So when workers are contracting COVID-19, they often are sharing this housing with other workers, exposing their entire households, which can be very large, to coronavirus, and needlessly jeopardizing the lives of other workers, especially those who are older and in severe risk of complications. Healthy homes promote good physical and mental health, and good health depends on having homes that are safe and free from physical hazards and overcrowding. Here in Maryland, while our farm workers and crab pickers may be housed in isolated rural areas, they are an integral part of our community during the season. They shop at our grocery stores, they attend churches, they utilize childcare services. And for those of us on the Eastern Shore who live where the outbreaks at poultry plants, farms, and crab houses have spread to our community, we understand far too well that COVID-19 does not discriminate. Protecting our workers is important public health policy. Keeping workers safe keeps their families safe, and it keeps our communities safe. So passing this emergency bill will improve housing conditions and mitigate the spread of COVID-19. I urge this committee to adopt a favorable report on House Bill 577. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Soma Guzman.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee. My name is Soma Guzman, and I'm the Policy Director and Legislative Counsel with Centro de los Derechos del Migrante, otherwise known as Center for Migrants' Rights. I am here to ask for your support on HB 577, the Healthy Farm Workers Act, which would mitigate the risks of COVID-19 by ensuring that migrant workers have access to healthy and safe housing. CDM supports migrant workers throughout their labor migration journey, from the moment they are recruited in their home communities abroad to their workplace in the United States and upon their return home. And the way employer provided housing comes about for migrant workers is usually within the H2a program. It is a requirement of the program. So businesses, employers that wish to access H2a workers, they need to provide housing that complies with federal regulations that are enforced by the state. And H2B, the non-agricultural visa, has no such requirement. That is correct, but there's nothing in the federal regulations preventing the state from implementing guidelines and ensuring that housing can be up to par and that is in good conditions. So migrant workers, they're people that come to work in Maryland for a work season. Some come from other states and some come from abroad, like I mentioned. And every year there are thousands of migrant workers that come to perform the essential work in the food processing industries in Maryland. They're farm workers, they're crop pickers, they're in poultry, right? And they have been at the forefront during the pandemic. Yet, like my fellow advocates have shared, they find themselves in poor, substandard housing. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the problems already facing this highly vulnerable community, especially when it comes to housing and transportation, because they work and live in close proximity and because they are dependent on their employers. So these are workers that don't know the lay of the land. They don't know about Craigslist. They don't know about like housing pages on Facebook. Their housing arrangements are made for them through their recruiter, through their employer. And then when they get here to their work site, that's where they're going to live. And also the fact that their work authorization and their non-immigrant visa is attached to their employer. And these are forces that make it very, very difficult for workers to come forward and share poor housing. It's very unlikely that a worker will put themselves on the line and complain about poor housing conditions. And usually what we see is that they put their head down, they keep on working, they hope they can make it through the season so they can return another season because they have families that are relying on them. I also want to mention that we are the authors of 2 reports focusing on the crop picker woman. They are titled Picked Apart, and most recently in 2020, Breaking the Shell. They're on our web page. And just a quick anecdote. So I wanted to share this. Rocio, a worker that refused to share her name, told us that it would be great to have inspections and to have someone ensure that they're not living in crowded facilities because they are afraid of sharing their names, of revealing their identities. And HB 577 is about creating a plan of action to mitigate the risks of COVID-19, to ensure that workers do not get other workers sick, and most importantly, they don't continue, that we manage to successfully beat COVID-19 in the state of Maryland. So please issue a favorable report on HB 577. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Lewis.
Hello. My name is Linda Lewis of Lewis Orchards in Dickerson, Maryland. It is in Montgomery County, and I oppose Bill 577. The requirements for the H2A worker employees, which some of the bill covers, are already implemented with the State Labor Department, which includes inspections of housing and transportation, hand washing stations, sanitation in fields, and provides transportation to the store and to doctors. Not only that, I believe federal, state, and local governments have put into law that no one can be evicted during this pandemic. Some of the things are written in this bill will cause undue harm and burdens on the agricultural employee and employers, like separate living quarters for health issues and age, professional cleaning and housing, professional cleaning for housing and transportation, and to impose enhance and penalties for employees and employers for not following COVID. Do you know what the guidelines were when I asked back in April 6th of 2020?
To me, they're the icing on the cake. They make people feel safer, and that's great. That's a great.
I don't know who the icing of the cake is.
But they're not a prerequisite.
Promote social distancing and vigorous cleaning. That's what I was told by the Department of Agriculture. So I came up with my own requirements to keep my employees safe on the farm. Everyone was to wash their hands with bar soap or liquid soap, hand sanitizer after every job. Try to maintain 6 feet around each other in greenhouses, packing sheds, and harvesting. And while at lunch, the people who lived together, worked together at the same jobs if possible. So if someone was exposed, we could watch and have the group self-quarantine. We did individual coolers. We limited people in vehicles, and at the end of the day, they would wipe and hand sanitize each vehicle. Face coverings were used and washed daily unless they were working by themselves. We provided gloves. They were to take temperatures, And we limited people onto the farm due to COVID since nobody knew anything. To date, none of our employees in the 2020 growing season came down with COVID. House Bill 577 is a bill that singles out a group of people that is unfair and unequal treatment of age, disability, and ethnic background, which is discrimination against and is against the law. Thank you.
Right. Do we have any questions? Seeing none.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I did have a question. I apologize.
Delegate Charkoudian.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Ms. Lewis. Thank you for joining us. I guess my question is this: what you listed was a number of precautions that you've taken, and I have spoken. I don't know if that you and I have had a chance to speak. Part of what I'm trying, but I've spoken to some other farmers in the Montgomery County area about precautions that were taken, and it sounds like you on your farm were able to come up with a number of really safe approaches and that it was successful. And we do see farms that haven't been as successful. And part of what I'm trying to sort out in my mind is what are the things in here that either you weren't doing already or other folks weren't doing. I'm trying to see where the difference is between the stuff that you've already put in place, a lot of folks have put in place, and what this would require. Do you, and if you don't know the answer to that, I could ask somebody else too. I'm just, that's a piece of, because you listed a lot of things that you're already doing. I'm just trying to wrap my head around where the, what the additions are with this bill.
Okay, so I came up with this plan when my sister-in-law came down with the COVID in the Mount Airy nursing home that exploded. And that's when I asked.
I'm sorry.
The department, she's alive because we made the right decision. But that's when I asked, that day I asked the Department of Agriculture, what can we do? Because you know what happened in that nursing home? I didn't want to have it happen in ag. But really, looking back in April, no one had any answers, and everybody had to scramble for what we could put in place and what we could do and what we couldn't do. So, I mean, it's hard. There's no real answers. If you do this way or if you do that way. I was just fortunate that I had employees that wanted to listen to me, and I was the nag. I nagged and nagged and nagged because I knew that if COVID came onto our farm market, we were done. We're done agriculture. We're done. We couldn't recover.
Well, okay. Thanks for no, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that you were successful, and it's just I am hearing from some folks that they were successful. They put practices in place, and I'm just trying to understand what were the things that were successful that you did that other farms have done, and then what are the additional pieces that this sort of adds to you that feels like the extra burden beyond what you were already doing. And I can follow up with other folks if you don't know the answer to that.
Well, okay, so in my farm market, I required all the customers to wear gloves and masks. Okay, and if you had gloves, you use hand sanitizer. All my employees, the guys that come in from H2a did not like to wear the one mask. They like to wear bandanas. So it's things that you're going to fight. Do you know what I mean? So then I had someone come in and talk to everybody, all of us at one time, and ask questions about COVID. How they could catch it, why it was important to wear a mask, because I couldn't be the mother all the time. It's hard. It's hard to be the mask police, tell everybody to wash your hands, to do everything. It's difficult because you know what? All of us are sick of wearing the mask now. Yeah. All of us. So I don't know what I did or didn't do that didn't come to our farm, knock on wood, because I was blessed.
Well, thank you for all the precautions that you did take to keep the community safe. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
John Fendrick.
Okay. At the end, if you want, I could probably answer some of the questions you asked Linda. So, okay. Am I talking? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is John Fendrick and my wife Mary. We own Rock Hill Orchard Woodbourne Creamery in Mount Airy, Maryland, which again is in Montgomery County. Our farm's 200 acres. We have pick your own apples, peaches, corn maze, have Guernsey cows. We do our own milk and ice cream processing, have an on-farm market. We've been bringing in H2a workers for about 6 years to do our field work. I'm here to testify against the bill. To me, while I understand why some people think it might be a good idea, farmers actually do make common sense. I mean, I can't speak for the poultry industry in the Eastern Shore. I don't know, but I can tell you what the farmers do in my area. As Linda said, we need the workers to because without the workers, I can't find American workers to do the work. So without them, I might as well just give up and just stop growing fruits and vegetables, which means actually if I don't have people coming to pick apples, I don't have people who are going to come to the farm to buy ice cream. So these two sort of go together. So we went through COVID last year. I mean, we, similar to Linda, we came up with a lot of our own rules of what to do. We had thousands and thousands of people. I mean, we literally have, when I say thousands, we literally have many thousands of people there, throughout the fall, throughout the year, for agritourism. We had no instances of COVID for any of my field staff. We do had some instances in our farm market, which is Americans, where they had all of them end up being false positives. But we do, so on our farm, everyone uses masks, they use hand sanitizer, we spray tables down, we have bathrooms, we have hand washing stations. We have a lot of this, and it's not just due to COVID. I mean, there's so many things that, like good agricultural practices, there's so many things that the farm community already has to do that does a lot of this. Not all of our customers are happy with us, but so to me, the housing requirements, some of the biggest issues. The bill would essentially require me to have a second house or apartment that's ready to go for pre-approved for quarantine. I legally can't put my workers anywhere except the housing that's pre-approved. I actually have a housing inspection this afternoon. Without that housing inspection passing, I can't get what's called a 9142A, which is the labor certification. Without that, I can't go to ICE to bring my workers in. So there already is a mechanism that says if you don't have adequate housing, they're not coming. The federal rules are pretty strict. I mean, did you realize that screens are required in every window? You have to have a wash sink in the laundry area. You can only have a certain number of people in every room based upon the square footage of the windows. I mean, technically, I've talked to a lot of farmers. The houses the workers have are better than my house. As far as additional inspections, if you're going to do it, you better make sure that your workers are in quarantine and do not have COVID. If not, they're not coming to my worker housing. We do not let our workers out. Basically, they are essentially in a bubble. I guess I'm at the end. So thank you again for your time. I want to reiterate my opposition. I will say, if you want to do something about this, how about we get H2a workers at the front of the line to get vaccinations? That would probably do more than anything else for housing.
Thank you, sir. Vince McAvoy.
Thank you, Chair. How are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
Great, thank you. I want to testify strongly against this bill, and I want to put it in the context of what we've gone through in the state for the past.
Mr. McAvoy, is there a way we could get the volume turned up just a little bit?
I'll try. Is that better? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Again, testify strongly against this bill in light of what we've looked at in Maryland for the past year. We had people in Maryland residents deemed non-essential. We have studies that show with some certainty that there is increased COVID cases around the Texas border in line with traffic across that border. It seems to me that if we're having a problem, instead of going this route that would adversely affect the industries on the Eastern Shore, that the best thing to do would be look at our own workers. I wonder if we aren't at the inflection point now in the economy where, given that people have not gotten unemployment checks in 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, that we do have a renewed interest in taking up those jobs. I think there are certain areas, maybe delegate walkers. I know in Baltimore, we could probably get some people on vans to get out there for doing that day work. And I think that would resolve a lot of these issues. I remember when I first started visiting Annapolis years ago, there was a climate against the Eastern Shore. I think that's wrong-minded. You know, with the One Maryland issue, we rely on that poultry industry. And if it's going to take Marylanders to keep it afloat, then I say let it be Marylanders keeping it afloat. I certainly don't think that they should get additional help that, as Delegate Walker said, that our own residents are not getting. This is a hard time, requiring hard choices. I'm particularly alarmed about the punitive issues of this bill, as well as the fiscal cost. This is not a time to be burdening our small businesses who are trying to stay afloat, nor is it a time to spend more when we're basically in a self-imposed era of frugality. And I think that there was a lot of great comments that I heard the delegates bringing up earlier. Instead of trying to rework this bill, honestly, I hope it just gets scrapped. And I thank you all for listening. Have a good day.
Are there any questions? If not, can we go to Robert Butts, please?
Yes, hello. My name is Robert Butts, and I'm here today to testify in opposition to HB 577. I'm a resident of Montgomery County and owner of Windridge Vineyards, a farm winery located in Darnestown, Maryland. We've been using the H2a program for 4 years to bring guest workers up from Mexico to assist us with work on our vineyards. I wanted to say a quick thanks to Delegate Von Stewart. He did agree to meet with me and listen to my concerns, which is important. My main takeaway from our conversation, Delegate Stewart's comments today, and that from others testifying in support, is that the primary intent of this bill is to address worker housing voluntarily provided by certain large H2B employers. The text of this bill goes way beyond this target, however, and will harm many small businesses. In my case, for example, the proposed segregated housing requirement would be impossible for me unless I have pre-approved housing. The transportation requirement will currently make it impossible for me to transport my workers. The overall effect of this bill would make the H2A program unworkable for me. Also, there appears to me to be a fundamental misunderstanding of the H2A and H2B programs. To be clear, H2B workers are not considered farm workers under federal law, and in fact cover a wide range of businesses. Additionally, H2A housing is required and meets robust federal standards. There is no housing requirement for H2B. This bill will require H2B employers to provide housing where no requirement currently exists in federal and state law. Many businesses, restaurants, for example, use H2B workers and do not promise housing as permitted. Are we really going to tell these struggling businesses they now need to provide housing in a pandemic? This bill, if passed, will lead to a multitude of these types of unintended consequences to businesses that are not the target of this legislation. For this reason, this bill should be discarded. However, if it is the will of the legislature to carry this bill forward, the following changes should be made. Eliminate all reference to H2A. Drop the housing requirement of the H2B portion of the bill. Make the requirement similar across all employers. If any employer provides housing, then establish minimum standards. Don't single out H2A and H2B for special treatment. Establish a minimum business size for regulations of the bill to take effect. Anyway, please consider scrapping this bill outright, and if not, consider my amendments. Respectfully, and I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butts. Dean Flowers.
Thank you, Chairman Davis and the Economic Matters Committee for the time to voice our opposition to the House bill. I'm Dean Flowers, President and COO of Phillips Seafood Operations. Phillips Seafood, a family-owned business that began in 1914 on Hooper's Island and expanded the restaurant business in 1956 to Ocean City. Both of these operations currently use H2B visa workers to fill positions. During the high season, we employ approximately 225 on the Eastern Shore. Phillips Crab House and AE Phillips follow all CDC guidance relating to COVID. We provide COVID prevention training based on CDC guidelines, including use of face coverings, hand washing, social distancing, enhanced sanitation protocols. We do health screenings and temperature checks at every shift in collaboration with the local health departments. Our staff housing, we've increased the distancing where possible, reduce occupancy, and increase the sanitation protocol throughout the housing. Set up isolation rooms for potential need. Our AE Phillips Crab processing plant is a small seasonal operation that depends on H2B visa workers to survive. Without H2B visa workers, we are not able to operate, plain and simple. The provision in the bill requiring separate living, sanitation, and kitchen facilities for workers with underlying conditions and workers over 60 is not possible. We simply do not have the space to handle this requirement. The provision that workers be transported with 6 feet of social distance is far more restricted than MTA restrictions and will require multiple runs to town each week, a 40-minute drive each way. This would be a burden to the staff. Our workers are free to travel when and where they please, but the reality is that they don't have transportation and they rely on our complementary transportation. My understanding is the testimony in favor of House Bill 577 generally focus on substandard, inhumane, and deplorable living conditions. I can testify that these words do not accurately describe the living conditions that Phillips makes available for workers, visa or U.S. employees. There are already health department regulations addressing inadequate housing. I urge the committee to direct your efforts in a way that will positively impact the workers. Enforce the regulations that already exist. Weed out the bad players. Please do not cripple the majority of employers who appreciate and count on their workers to survive. Thank you. Any questions?
Joel, Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Flowers. I guess I just I want to ask a similar question because I feel like we have folks who are here who are outlining the steps that they have taken to keep their workers safe. And then, you know, we did hear throughout the summer and some into the fall about problematic conditions. And so just trying to wrap my head around like, what would those steps be? And I appreciate Mr. Butts's comments about some things that could be done, although I appreciate that you're also saying you'd rather we not move this forward. So I guess my question to you, Mr. Flowers, is you were just talking about enforcement, and I'm wondering, is it your sense that there are things on the books that could be better enforced, that might be a way to move the protection forward? Maybe you could say more about that last comment you made about enforcement. Are there things that would already, you think, address these things and we need to find either funding or direct folks to be enforcing them better?
Look, I can only speak for Phillips. If we don't treat our employees properly, we won't have them. We will not be in business. So we treat people the way they should be treated. The way I read some of the comments, it sounds like a lot of businesses are not doing that. So now you're going to come in and enforce a standard that in some cases we might not be able to handle. And it's just not right. You should be addressing the problems in the system. And I can't speak for them because we do our best to take care of our staff. If we don't have staff, we don't have a business. For example, AE Phillips, the first time in over 100 years, we did not open last year because we didn't get H2B visas. So we try to treat them right. And honestly, we have most of our staff coming back year after year. So I can't speak for the negatives. All I can speak is how we try to take care of our staff. We don't want people to get sick. The last thing we want to do is have a person get sick, and that essentially stops our business. So I think everybody on the panel that has spoken against it feels the same way. They can't run their business if they don't have their staff that working hard and able to do it on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thank you. I just, one of the challenges I think that we often have on this committee when we're looking at any regulation is that we're trying to regulate folks that maybe don't have that same spirit, and folks who will come and testify and are more active are looking out and are often trying to do the right thing. And so we're in this position of trying to figure out how do we set the right rules to address sort of the bad actors, and do it in a way that doesn't sort of unfairly penalize the folks who are doing the right thing. And I think that often we find ourselves in the same sort of question, and the people who come to us are often the more active community members, business leaders who may be doing it right. I don't know the details of how things are working for you, but that's you sounds like you're saying you believe you are. And yet we have concerns about how things might be going for other folks. And so just trying to figure out, again, like where that difference is and what's the right place to set it. But I appreciate you. Thank you.
One point on there is, the above 60 and with underlying conditions. Well, we don't even know what the underlying conditions would be. So that impacts the number, we have a certain amount of space. So if we are interviewing people, it seems like we would have to find out backgrounds about them, which seems like it's a little bit, you're talking about discrimination there, and that could be a problem for us. So there's a lot of things built into this that jump out at us and create problems. So
some of the specifics, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any further questions? Is that Delegate Arentz?
Yes, there it is. Mr. Flowers, just real.
Delegate Arentz, we need you to turn your camera on, please, sir.
Oh, I forgot about that. Hang on. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. Mr. Flowers, are you saying that Phillips is following the rules and they don't have these issues? Is that what you're implying to us?
what I'm saying is we're following the rules. I'm not saying that COVID can't hit us, because honestly, it can hit anybody. So we do our best within the guidelines that we, between the state, the CDC, the local government, we do our best to follow all the guidelines in place or regulations in place. But I will say, it doesn't mean that you can't get hit by COVID, but we do our best to fight that.
Okay, my bottom line on that was you're just following what's required of you. You're doing everything that's required of you now, and you've been able to manage. And we're not really causing it. You're not causing any harm on all this, and we do need to go after the people that may not be following the rules like you. Isn't that so?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about the camera.
No problem. Delegate Adams.
I was good with his camera off. He's my friend, Derek. Dean, I got a question for you. And you brought this up in your testimony, H2B visas. Did you say A.E. Phillips had no H2B visas last year?
Yes, that's correct. We didn't qualify for them.
Now, that's a leading question, because I know on the Eastern Shore, we've been struggling mightily in the restaurant and the seafood industry for a lot of reasons, but not least of which is the idea that even getting H2B visas right now are hard, and it's through a lottery system. Could you, in like 20 or 30 seconds, just describe how difficult it is to even get H2B visas, as we're trying to pass a bill that's aimed directly at a $600 million a year seafood industry that you're a participant in?
Well, essentially, each year we have to apply for visas for for A.E. Phillips. This year we applied for 34 visas to run that operation. And we had to send that into the federal government at essentially January 1st. It goes in a queue. This year, there was almost 100,000 applications for 33,000 positions. So essentially what happens is a business like us, who really we can't we can't operate without these visas. I'll give you an example. The last 5 years in our advertisement, which has to be done in this program, we've had one U.S. person apply for a position down in our facility down at Hooper's Island. So over 5 years, that's one, and that's through online services, advertisement in local papers, and so forth. So it's very, very difficult to get in this, and essentially, like I said, for the first time in over 100 years, we were shut down last year. So we were completely out. We could not open, and we ran. And we did have several people from the United States that worked for us that were cut way back. It's just a real shame. You lose your crabbers. They don't have a place for the crab to sell their crabs. You lose your suppliers for packaging and everything. It's a domino effect. So that trying to get H2B visas for essentially a third.
I mean, it's heartbreaking as a representative for Dorchester County to watch a bill like this come through, because almost all of Maryland's crab processing happens in Dorchester County and Hooper's Island, and certainly some other locations here in Cambridge that we can hear about in a minute. But this kind of bill strikes a crushing blow to Maryland's seafood industry, and really attacks part of the restaurant industry that has been just absolutely destroyed in many ways through the COVID pandemic. And now we're in the General Assembly watching bills like this coming through. And I appreciate your testimony today to add some light to this H2B issue.
Thank you.
Jack Brooks.
Hi, my name is Jack Brooks. I am president of the Chesapeake Bay Seafood Industries Association here in Maryland. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to speak. And Delegate Stewart, thank you for the opportunity to address your bill. Our association respectfully opposes HB 577. As Mr. Flowers said just a few minutes ago, these workers, H2B workers that many of our members employ, are the lifeline of our industry. And as evidenced by A.E. Phillips last year, having to close, not open, first time in history in well over 100 years. We do have huge problems with the visa program, not even to mention the pandemic, the worldwide pandemic that we've all been suffering through. So obviously we take worker safety and worker protection very, very seriously, and we have this year. I submitted a letter of testimony with listing a few examples of some of the efforts that we've undertaken to expand upon what we already do to make sure that the workers are safe. As we take temperatures and have PPE equipment for everybody, maximum distancing both at the workplace and also at the company housing. Now, I must point out, as mentioned earlier, the H2B program does not require employers to provide housing. But we do voluntarily do that. But we do have workers that do not utilize or take us up on our offers for to provide housing, and they find their own housing, which is fine. But I don't know how something like this would reach out to them. This year, with the pandemic raging, we chose to reduce our staff, to short staff our production, so enable us to provide more space both in production areas and also in the housing. So we're conscious of that, and we're taking it very, very seriously. We have on-site testing by the Department of Health here in Dorchester County, where they did 100% testing of all our workers. We'd have provided a separate quarantine house, and we're doing many of the things mentioned here. However, we do view this as government overreach, and that we are doing these things. Contrary to some of the remarks earlier, the U.S. Department of Labor does inspect housing when they do come down for inspections or investigations. So we are responsible. We do take this very seriously, and we do respectively oppose HB 577. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions, Delegate Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I forgot your last name. I'm calling you Mr. Jack. What's the name of the association you represent?
Chesapeake Bay Seafood Industries Association.
Okay. I'm going to ask you for this. Although, you know, I'm pretty sure, I don't know if I'm in favor of the bill necessarily either. I do believe that the delegate and some of the people that have spoken on behalf of the bill have a somewhat of a valid point. There seem to be some bad apples out there. And if there's some groups out there that you can touch to make sure, I think we all agree people should have humane living conditions, no matter the condition it is, what I'm feeling. I am kind of getting the sense that I could see why somebody come to this country that signed up for, you know, the required housing type of job, you know, they get here and they're staying in some conditions that are, you know, not humane. What can your group do to help ensure that stuff like this doesn't happen? I know we say the federal government's supposed to enforce this, but obviously it's, you know, we're a big country there. Do you all try to police your own at all?
Well, yes, we do. Good question. Thank you. We do have periodic meetings with U.S. Department of Labor that they come in some winters, and we do talk about new regulations, new expectations, things they may be looking for that they had not looked for in the past. We do evaluate our own, everybody's looking at their own house to make sure it's in compliance. You know, bad actors, you know, there's no room for them in this environment or any environment. I mean, we feel that we're doing a very good job. Nobody's immune to COVID, has been evidenced by the news at night. So we are taking every precaution, and we take it very, very seriously. And if there's
the
a room
COVID,
for improvement,
I understand that. I believe, I'm thinking it's almost a separate issue. Like, you know, as a state representative, I really don't want to hear about anybody living in some really bad conditions like this. That can, if we can all work together on it. I like what you said, how, you know, you tell FDA what to look for sometimes, and labor what they need to look for. So I like that. Let's hopefully keep that going. I know you all are opposing this bill here, but you know, whatever you can do to help ease my conscience, as long as it's sponsor the bill's conscience, and a lot of us on this committee, we'd appreciate that.
Well, we share that, and believe me, we have returning workers. We have 100% returning worker rate. So the folks that come back every year are people that have been with us for many, many years, sometimes decades. And we have an open door policy. If we got a leaky spigot, we need to know. If we've got something that's not working properly, we need to know. And it works. It works well for us. We've been in the program since 1997. And without the program, as Mr. Flowers said, we don't open. Our company, my particular company, has been in business since 1890. Our great grandfather started, and the family still owns and operates it. So we're really proud of that, and totally dependent on this program. So the people that come in, they're great people, they're hard workers. We work shoulder to shoulder with them. We have great respect for them, and it's our top priority to make sure that they're happy, they're protected, and they're safe.
All right, thank
you.
All right, any additional questions? Who am I? Delegate Mounts?
Yeah, please, Chairman, thank you. Jack, good to see you. Excuse me, Jack, good to see you. Thank you for testifying. There was some testimony earlier today that pretty much, if you surmise it, would amount to some allegations more toward the Salisbury area. And it's unfortunate because some of these things I've looked into, and I've heard another side of the story, at least with regard to COVID, you know, through what is now known as Tidal Health. It used to be Peninsula Regional, was involved in some of the things that went on down there. That's not saying I can't speak to the exact testimonies, but you know, the state's a big state. Every county's different. And our health offices have had a big role locally. And I'm sure the Dorchester County Health Officer has been in touch with you, and just to try to shed some light for the members of the committee on kind of the way things are regulated and operated locally on the shore. Can you share some of your interactions with the health officer, any guidance they've given you, the checks, the talks and things like that with regard to COVID and workplace safety and transmission for the community in general?
Thank you. Great question, Delegate Maltz. And yes, we do. We're in constant contact both with the Dorchester County Health Department and also Chop Tank Health. Chop Tank Health is a migrant medical facility here in our region. And as a matter of fact, they come to our site and we ask them to talk to our workers, both in English and in Spanish. And we ask them to make sure that they remind us all of our responsibilities, both at the workplace, at home, and while they're out shopping or out in public. And we've done that multiple times this past year, and they've been wonderful. Every time we call, they respond. They are right here in Dorchester County, so it's an easy lift to get them there. Now, if we have to have social distancing of 6 feet in a vehicle, that's a real problem, as mentioned by other people here. So we do have constant communication with them, and as I mentioned, I think all of our colleagues, all of our members that utilize the program have had this both this contact with Chop Tank Health and also the county health department come and do on-site testing.
I wanted to ask you a funny question about jumbo lump, but this is too serious of a matter. Jumbo lump is the best crab meat for everybody on this call, and Jack's got a lot of it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate Maltz. Well, we wouldn't have without these folks that come up here and work every year. So, but thank you for that.
Righty. Did I miss anybody? If not, that concludes the witness list for the bill hearing. I want to thank everyone for their participation, our witnesses, for all the information you brought to the committee. Members, we will now be adjourned. Thank you very much.